Hi, everybody. How are you
Hello.
doing today? My name is Brittany, and I will be your studio host with Etcher Lab. Today we have Yola.
Hi, everyone.
She will be doing a beautiful little avocado for us. And just to let you guys know how the swing of things are going to go, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate. Just put it in the chat for us. If they're relevant to what Yola's doing in the moment, I will ask her. If they're not, we're going to do a little Q&A session at the end. It'll be about 5 or so minutes towards the end of the session. It is an hour-long session today. And with that being said, I will drop things slowly into the chat. So just keep your eye on it once in a while. And I don't think I have anything left to say. So with that being said, I will pass it over to you, Yola.
Thank you so much, Brittany. Hello, everyone. It's nice to have you here. So today we'll be painting a little avocado in watercolors. It's going to be a cross-section of an avocado, flat lay, where we'll be tackling all the issues around building shadow and texture, even in a simple composition like this. So botanical illustration theme, my favorite topic, avocado, and this should be really fun. I'm using all of Etcher's watercolor supplies. So it's the Etcher watercolor paints, the Etcher sketchbook, and the Etcher paintbrushes. And yeah, I can't wait to do this. Should I introduce myself as well a little bit? Is that the right moment? So I'm a freelance illustrator. I work predominantly in watercolors, and my niche, so to say, that seems to be developing further and further is food illustration, and I do a lot of fruit illustration as well. So I kind of have an affinity for fruits most of the time. So this is just like some samples of my work. And yeah, today we'll be painting an avocado, and this is kind of like the style we're going for. So it's quite realistic, fairly resembling the real thing. So it's not too whimsical. I want to keep it fairly, real. So let's do it. I hope you enjoy it. Are we good to start?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Okay, I'm just like waiting for the green light. Okay, cool. So basically I'll be recreating this avocado. So I'll be just like doing kind of a similar thing on another page. So I'm using the sketchbook vertically. I'm just going to, use my little clip to put it flat on the desk. And we need to start with a simple sketch. So of course we'll be using watercolors, and I'll be discussing the color mixes and everything in a minute, but I want to quickly touch on sketching for watercolor painting, especially botanicals. So of course, if we're after kind of a botanical realistic style, it's worth having a sketch just so we kind of follow our own guidelines and we know what we're doing. Whenever you make a sketch on watercolor paper, try to make it very light and very gentle. So the lines should be very kind of, thin, don't put too much pressure on the paper. The reason for that is because watercolors are a transparent medium. And if your pencil lines are too thick, then they will show from underneath the layers of paint, which is not something you really want. I mean, maybe you want that, but it's not ideal. And then, obviously use a rubber if your line's a little bit too thick. I have a kneadable eraser. This is like bendable. I'm not sure what they're called in other countries. I think it's just called like bendable eraser here in the UK. Very good for watercolor paper because it's very gentle.
Sorry, Yola, we actually are having a lot of trouble seeing your pencil marks. Do you want to just move your sketchbook just closer to the camera for a second?
One sec. I think the reason you can't see them very well is because they're actually very, very light. So, I mean, I'm making them very light from the get-go just because I want to minimize the process of like having to, rub with my eraser on the paper. So essentially, yeah, I mean, the sketch is meant for your eyes only. So it's kind of guiding you. Can you see it a little bit better now?
I can see it better now, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just the exposure as well. But yeah, so the essence of the sketch for watercolor painting is that it should kind of be guiding your own eyes, but it's light enough so it doesn't, like show through too much. So I'm just making it very gentle, putting hardly any pressure on the paper with my pencil, but I can still, see it myself. So that's good enough. So essentially, yeah, that's the kind of concept of it. So it will be very, very kind of you know, almost difficult to make out, but as long as you can see it, that's, you know, that's good. Let me just, okay. So now that I have my simple sketch, so basically it's just the cross section of an avocado. So, you know, the classic avocado shape, and then I sketched out the pip as well. We're going to start with our watercolors. So just quickly to let you know, we'll be painting the green flesh of the avocado first, and then we're going to go in with the pip as the latter step. So we're focusing on mixing our greens as the first colors. So I'm using the Etcher brushes today, and I usually go for round brush when I'm mixing colors from my palette, just because, you know, I don't know, I quite like the shape. You know, it's got a nice point, so I can just mix my colors quite easily. The first thing you need to have on your desk as well when you're painting anytime, anything in watercolors, is at least 2 jars of water. So I have actually more than 2, just because I don't want to get up and, you know, change my water all the time. But make sure that you have at least 2 jars. The reason for that is that when we're mixing colors, you don't want to make them muddy. So if you're switching from one color to another, it's important to have more than 1 jar of water so that you can keep the transparency of your colors. Okay. I also have some kitchen towel here on the side, very useful for getting rid of excess paint, excess water, if you have too much moisture on your brush, and some scrap paper. This is for testing my colors. So when we're mixing colors, we'll be testing them here on the side. And then I have my palette. And also here on the side, which you might not see, this is my little ceramic palette. You can use a ceramic plate for mixing your colors as well. Ceramic is really good for watercolors because it's easy to clean. So I'm going to go in with my round brush, and I'm making it nice and moist in my jar of water. Just loading it up with clean water, but make sure that your brush is not dripping. So right now, I don't know if you can tell, but the brush is like super wet and I have loads of water on it. So that is a little bit too much probably. You just want it nice and moist, you know, not dripping. And we'll be focusing on mixing our greens and kind of yellowish greens first. So with that brush, I actually recommend that you use all the space in your mixing palette to see what kind of colors you can get. So first of all, I picked up some of this very bright green. This is called lime green, this one by Etcher. And this is a very vibrant color. It's almost neon-like, which is not very realistic, right? It's very like, you know, super neon. So this is not ideal. What you have to do in order to achieve colors which are a little bit more muted and a little bit more natural is to mix those kind of neon colors, and in this case is the lime green, with some more of an earthy tone. So for example, I have my ochre here. It's the Mighty Ochre. It's kind of like a, you know, grass colored green. When you mix that together, you're going to achieve something resembling like an olive green. So you can kind of, you know, tweak that a little bit and see what you get. This is why you have to have some test sheets on the side to see what colors you can achieve. The more water you add on your brush, of course, the more transparent your colors will become. So you kind of have to test these colors before you go into the final painting. But the colors we're going in for the flesh are kind of like olive green toned. I'm also going to mix in a little bit of like very light greenish yellow. This is going to be the middle of my avocado flesh. So like literally the center of the avocado will be kind of more in the yellow tone. And then on the outside, we're going to be transitioning into the green tones. So again, I'm just trying to reach a color which is kind of like a natural earthy yellow. So you can mix some of this lemon yellow with a bit of this ochre that we used previously as well, just to make sure that you can get this like really warm, earthy, kind of brownish yellow. And I feel like that's pretty good. You can add a touch of green to it as well, just to make sure that it's like yellow, but it's got slight undertones of green. So, you know, it's good to have a reference picture as well if you have an avocado photo loaded up in front of you, just to make sure the colors you're mixing are correct. And I'm going to mix a third tone. So basically I'm mixing all of my colors before I paint. And this is important because then I don't have to like go back and forth and stress about the colors. I'm going to mix kind of like a darker green. So I'm using these two greens here. This is a leaf green and emerald green. Just seeing what I can make up with those. And I always tend to just add this ochre because this ochre color makes all of my colors a little bit more muted, a little bit more earthy. And this is a beautiful color that I achieved here by mixing those three tones, two greens and this ochre. Okay, it's going to be our like kind of almost on the outside of the avocado. Okay, so now I'm pretty much good to go in with my main flesh of the avocado. So in order to do this, I'm going to use the wet and wet technique, which in watercolor means that you apply paint to a wet surface. And you do that so that the paint kind of spreads evenly, and then you can have like a nice even surface. So again, I'm going to use a brush for this to make my surface wet first. And I'm going to use this flat brush for this. Actually, you can use, you know, just any big round brush, but I kind of fancy using the flat brush by Etter. It's quite a fun little angular shape. And make sure you use clean water for this. So again, I'm going to load up my brush with clean water, which is why, you know, it's important to have at least 2 jars because the previous one's already contaminated. So I'm going to the second jar, which is clean water, loading my brush up with some clean water. And now I'm going to cover the surface of my avocado, excluding the pip, with clean water. So basically, I'm just making sure that the flesh of the avocado is nice and activated, but I will intentionally leave the space for the pip empty. As you can see, I can use the angular brush to kind of go around the edge of my pip here in a fairly like, you know, even manner. The benefit of the Etcher sketchbook, actually, I really like it because the paper is very thick and it absorbs water and pigment really well, but it works really well for the wet and wet technique. So when you put water, clean water on top of it, it doesn't dry as quickly as some other papers, which gives me quite a lot of room to now apply my colors to the surface as well. So I'll just put this against the light so you can see how much water I've put down. Hopefully you can see what I mean. Basically, if you can see the texture of the paper from underneath the layer of water, that's the right amount. So the trick here is to not use too much water, but also not too little. If you put too much, then your paint will puddle up. If you put too little, then it will, you know, not have the nice effect of merging the colors. So this takes some time to get it used to. If you're absolutely new to watercolor, this might be a little bit tricky, but, you know, just kind of try to practice using the right amount of water. As long as you can see the texture of the paint, of the paper underneath, that should be fine. Okay, so I'm going to put this brush away. I'm going to go back to my round brush. And I'm going to start with my yellow tone. So this is the middle of my avocado, because the middle of the avocado is the most yellow, the brightest, let's say. So I'm just loading up my brush with this color, but using quite a bit of water on my brush. So it's not like super dense color, it's quite watered out. And I'm just going to drop it down, kind of going back and forth from my paper to the palette. And I'm going to try to spread it evenly, kind of in the middle of the flesh of this avocado. Now, the thing is here, you have to do it fairly quickly, just so that, you know, the clean water that you've put down as the base doesn't dry. And you want to pull the pigment kind of around the page. So adding a little bit more water to the brush as well, you can spread the pigment around like so. So for now, the color is not very saturated, but it's, you know, think of it as laying like the base of the colors that are going to form the whole avocado. So the first layer is quite important just to get those tones right. I'm just spreading this around. If at any point you feel like your brush is too wet, just, you know, dry it up on the paper towel a little bit. And now when this is, kind of laid down, I'm going to use a little bit of this light green, not too much. I want to have a gradual change from my yellow onto this lime yellow. So basically those two colors that I mixed are kind of close to each other, but this one that I'm using right now is a little bit more green. And I'm trying to put the color which is a little bit more green, a little bit more to the sides. So not so much in the middle anymore, but kind of to the sides, like so. Okay. And now I want to do a little bit of lifting. So you can see this is not very even because, the first layer is not going to be very even. So don't stress too much about it. What you can do now is clean your brush off from those pigments, dry it up a little bit on your kitchen towel, just so it's kind of dry. And now if you want to preserve the highlights, so wherever you feel like the colors are a little bit too intense and you'd like to remove a little bit of that saturation, you can use a drier brush to kind of lift some of those intense colors. But since this is the first layer, we're just trying to build the base of our illustration. So I'm going to put a little bit more of an intense color here now. And this is going to indicate the shadow that the pip, which I'm going to paint in the next step, this is going to indicate the shadow that the pip is going to be putting down on the flesh of the avocado. So the light will be coming up from the right, from the top, from the top right. So the shadow will be here, roughly. And these are some of the things that you just, you have to kind of anticipate and think about before you paint this kind of realistic illustration. Just so, when you have a photo, you can observe the shadows and see where they where they're placed. So you can start building those shadow areas as well. Now, I'm doing this fairly quickly. So I know that maybe if you're new to this, you're like, oh my gosh, this pace is super quick. But the reason I have to do it quickly is because I don't want my avocado to dry up. So I'm still on the first layer. I'm still just building up the gradual changes from the first color to the green. And whilst I do that, it really helps me to have this surface still wet. So that's why I'm kind of, switching from that yellow to the green quite quickly, just making sure that I can build this first layer and then those colors will actually be in place before everything dries.
Don't worry if you're not able to keep up with Yola. This video will be available on our YouTube channel within, I think, a few hours after this live session.
Yeah, absolutely. Thing is, it's kind of difficult to do these kind of demonstrations to do it in real time, just because, of course, there's also different conditions that you might be painting in. And for example, the quickness with which your paint will dry depends on the humidity in your room, all these kind of little aspects, So, by all means, rewatch the video and you can pause it, you can, take your time with it. But I really need to kind of do it in my own pace as well, just so that the paper doesn't dry. So this is kind of, like a demonstration of how I really actually approach it. And the kind of tempo that I have to keep up in order to make sure that the wet and wet technique actually does what I want it to do. So as you can see, I'm kind of going back and forth, adding a little bit more pigment each time, and then I'm going back and forth again to the jar, spreading some of those colors around, making sure that I have an even transition from one color to another. And you achieve this evenness by working fairly quickly, which again, it comes with time. So be patient with yourself. Here I'm coming up with the third green that we mixed. So the idea that going from light to dark is very much applicable here. We went from the brightest, most washed out yellow in the middle of the avocado. And now my edges, I kind of want them to be fairly green. So I was building up this transition from the bright yellow in the middle And as I'm going to the sides of my avocado, I'm transitioning to a more saturated green and a more pure green, right? So it's definitely more green than yellow at this point on the edges. And again, when you feel like your edges are a bit too stark, because the green is like super different to the yellow, then you can add a little bit of water to your brush and slowly try to merge those edges. And again, this will work well if your surface is still wet, which is why, you know, watercolors are a bit of a gamble with time. It's both relaxing and also fast. It's like the weird paradox of watercolors. So, you know, you're just making sure that you can still merge those edges. So by doing all of those steps, kind of going from the yellow towards the green, making sure that you can blend those harder edges, you're building up a transition of color. And notice that I've been doing all of this in, you know, as my first layer. So, you know, the initial wash with the clean water that I've done, that's, you know, like that's the thing that helps me to merge those colors.
Yola, what would you do if it dried before you were done?
Well, there's many things you, well, not many things really. There's some things you can do. It's, well, first of all, it's important to work on the proper paper. So I hope that you're all using watercolor paper. Watercolor paper is, you know, important to use in these techniques, especially because if you use some kind of a paper which is not adjusted for watercolor, then the retention of water will not be very good. And the paper might dry really quickly, or it might buckle up. So first of all, make sure that you're definitely using watercolor paper. Second of all, I would just experiment with trying to use a little bit more water. So very often if it dries too quickly, by the way, I'm adding a little bit, I'm just like interrupting myself, but here I'm just adding a little bit of a darker shade of yellow. And this is again, going back to the idea of adding the shadow to the pip that I will add later. Yeah, try experimenting with using a little bit more water. So with watercolors, unfortunately, like the learning process, I'd say, is very much like back and forth in the sense that you have to try the same techniques and the same kind of basic techniques over and over in order to get a grasp of them. So the more you try to do these kind of washes with the wet and wet, the more you will start having like this, you know, sense and the muscle memory for how much water you have to use. So if it dries too quickly, I'd say you probably didn't use enough water, sorry. It's probably been a little bit too dry in the initial application. So you can try to re-wet it. You can use a little bit more clean water, not too much on your brush, and like, you know, just put another layer of clean water on top and see if you can kind of rectify that. There is a chance that you might, you know, kind of get your colors looking a little bit muddy if you do that. So, I mean, when I was learning, to be honest, I would just like start all over again. This was always my issue, you know. So I would start, something didn't go right, and like, okay, well, now I understand why this didn't work. So I would just try the same subject again, the same theme, trying to use a little bit more water next time, or a little bit less water, depending on what the issue was. And then slowly you kind of, you know, start narrowing your problem down. And you kind of figure out that way. Yeah, but unfortunately, it's quite difficult also not to show it, like if I'm not, you know, present with you in person. Online workshops are great, but of course, if I was with you in the room, it'd be so much easier to kind of see what the issue is. Okay, so we have our nice first layer down. Now what I'm going to do, I need to mix a little bit of a darker green, just so we're going to be working on the edges of our avocado. And I'm going to grab some of those darker value greens. So there's this green called emerald green. Oh, there we go. Emerald green. I'm going to grab a little bit of that in here. But again, it's a very bright green. It's kind of a little bit too bright. We're going for the organic looking colors, kind of more earthy. So the trick to make greens a little bit more muted down is actually to add a tiny bit of red to them. Since I'm going for dark green, I want
Would you
to
say
make
that
sure that
adding the complementary color to any color kind of dulls it down a bit?
yes. So yeah, that's a very useful thing to kind of keep in mind. That's like basic color theory, but you know, the color wheel, when you have like the basic representation of colors, you're going to have green, and then on the opposite side, you're going to have red. These colors cancel each other out. They're complementary colors, which means that they will be the most contrasting ones. If you mix them together, you know, you have to be fairly careful with the quantities and like the ratio of each one of those. You will be able to tone them down. So you see, I got this beautiful green by mixing my, which color was it? Leaf green, I think it was. Yeah, leaf green mixed with a little bit of red. And I got this really nice earthy dark green. I didn't use too much of this red. If you use too much, it would become brown. So be quite careful. So I have this really nice dark green mixed up. And now I'm going to kind of go on the edges of my avocado with the tip of my brush. So at this point, I'm not putting much pressure on the brush, just using the tip. The benefit
still... Sorry,
was there a question or?
yeah, I was just going to ask, is your paper still fairly wet?
Well, at this point, it's I would say it's like medium, like in the middle somewhere. So it's definitely doesn't, like what I'm doing right now, putting the dark color doesn't merge with the first layer as much. There's a little bit of movement here going on, but I think it mostly dried, especially on the edges. So that means that I can kind of have a sharp edge and not have to worry about the colors merging, you know, out of control. Using the tip of my brush, I can also put the little top of my avocado. You can kind of just sketch it out at first, you know. I'm always going in with the first layers for any of these new shapes that I'm adding. So I'm just going around around my avocado in movements like so, keeping the edges slightly uneven as well. This is to indicate the rough texture of the skin of my avocado. It's got like little bumps and stuff. So I want to make sure that my first layer of the skin is already, you know, building up this texture and the proper shape. But yeah, most of this avocado is, let's say, dry right now because it's not merging with the dark green that I'm going around with right now. Okay, and now the edge is fairly, like, you know, stark. I would say it's a little bit too intense. So what I would like to do is actually I'm going to use some of this dark green, mix a little bit more of it as well. You see, it's like going back and forth on yourself. You have to add a little bit more color as you go along. Which is why it's useful to remember what colors you mixed as well. Just like, you know, if you run out, then you're kind of quick to mix them back together. So I'm going to use the base of this dark green that I have here. And I'm going to add a little bit of a brighter green. So like the kind of closer to the value that we had on the edges of the flesh. So I'm mixing like a middle ground color here. So I'm just adding a little bit more of this lighter green to the dark green. And I have like this middle ground green, I would say.
Yola, I have a question from the chat.
Yes.
Do we draw the darkest line in short lines like how you're doing it right now, I guess, versus just one long continuous line?
I would say it really depends on you, to be honest. I think the reason why I do it is just because I got used to it. So I quite like the roughness of the edges that you can get if they're a little bit uneven, but you're more than welcome to go in one. I feel like it would be a little bit more difficult, perhaps, just to like follow it in an even line. We can certainly try. I think, yeah, it's not really a rule. It's just something that I do, but, you know, I'm sure there's many different ways you could approach that. So I'm adding this middle green here on the edges again. And before I go around the whole avocado, I don't want to do that, you know, the whole avocado at once. I will actually add more water to my brush right now. So I'm diluting this color. Basically, I'm just trying to spread this dark value and merge it with the flesh of the avocado. And I'm going to add more and more water as I go into the middle, because the more water I add, obviously still drying my brush on the kitchen towel as I do that, so my brush is not dripping with water. I'm kind of going back and forth by adding more water and more pigment. I'm basically trying to build a nice transition from a dark value to the middle of the avocado here. So now I suppose you could say that I'm kind of doing the reverse of what I've done before. So I'm going from darker to lighter this time. And again, I feel like, you know, like maybe you have questions as to why I'm doing it in this way. And I feel like, I don't know, I've painted avocados a lot, and this is just something that I got accustomed to. And it works for me to kind of paint the transition of colors that way. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure you could probably add this darker value at an earlier stage as well. Somehow I feel like adding the second layer like this adds a little bit more punch and a little bit more contrast. But having said that, yeah, you're more than welcome to try to add this darker value on the edges as the paper is still wet. You just have to be a little bit more careful, I guess, because adding, you know, really dark contrasting colors like this green right now is quite risky in the sense that, you know, you could potentially seep that dark color into the middle of the avocados if it hasn't dried properly. So, you know, that's why I'm doing it kind of in this order. I'm adding the darker value kind of a little bit later on. So as you can see, I'm going in sections. The reason for that.
Sorry to cut you off. Just letting you know you're at the half-hour mark.
Okay, brilliant. Hopefully we'll make it work. Oh my goodness. No, it's fine. We're on the right track. It's fine. We just need to do the pip. So it's all good.
It goes quick.
It does. I know. Always. It's always the way. So I'm just going to quickly try to do that all around my avocado here. But yeah, the reason I'm doing it in stages is because, oops, see, I didn't clean my brush properly here. So now I quickly can use a wet brush to lift that dark mark that I left there by accident. I don't know if you caught that. I have to remove it quickly just so it doesn't dry. But there was a little bit of a mistake that I've done. So, you know, if that happens to you, make sure that you can use a clean brush to lift that color that you don't want. If you rewatch the replay, I'm sure you can see what I've done there. So yeah, I'm just like, you know, going back and forth, adding dark color to my brush for the edges and then diluting it as I go towards the middle. And that way I get a clean transition from a darker saturated green into the lighter tones. So, you know, it's kind of a little bit nerve-wracking. Sometimes you feel like, you know, it's just not going to merge properly, but you know, watercolor is just one of those funny things. Like you have to have patience for them and for yourself. And, you know, if it doesn't work the first time, you just try again. That's essentially how I learned. So just relentless practice and practice. So eventually you get the muscle memory to do it.
We got another question from the chat.
Yes.
Was the dark skin outline dry before doing the darker green you're applying now?
I would say, again, it was like, well, it was a very concentrated color. So if you use quite a bit of pigment and not much water, then these kind of colors would dry quickly. So the skin that I put down as an outline was, yeah, I would say it would dry pretty much completely. It's kind of like almost difficult to put into words, one of those things, you know, like you kind of get a feeling for it. And the more you paint as well, this is like the great thing about watercolors, the more you paint, the more these things, they just like occur to you and you kind of get a sense for it. you don't really even like think about them logically. It's like, okay, this is the right time for me to go in with more water or, you know, more pigment. So I always try to just encourage that, you know, this feeling of like wanting to just keep practicing. And even if it means, you know, repeating the same subject, if you really devote to one subject, like an avocado or whatever you choose, then you will really kind of develop this method, you know, and it will kind of start making so much more sense the more you do it. Then basically you're just like, it's just muscle memory and a visual memory for these things too. So, okay. So here we have a nice, you know, kind of base layer of everything. The benefit of doing this in my order as well, so kind of working from the middle outwards, is that most of the flesh inside has dried by now. I'm pretty sure this is pretty dry. And the reason I want it to be dry is because I want to paint the pip. Now, I don't want to paint the pip if this was wet. I don't want to put it down yet, because otherwise, you know, the brown that I'm going to put in here would merge with the yellow and would just ruin the whole color scheme. So now I'm being conscious of the time, so I'm going to go in quickly and mix some of those browns for my pip. And again, you know, like sometimes the transitions might not be perfect, and I feel like perhaps I could have worked a little bit more here to transition those colors a little bit better. I'm not going to worry too much about it. You know, this is a thing, it's a quick demo. So you also have to be like, you know, good to yourself. But, you know, I would probably normally take a little bit more time to paint this than an hour. An hour is really not that much when you're painting with watercolors. So this is kind of like a quick demonstration of how to approach it, but you can definitely perfect it. That's what I mean. So I'm going to go in and mix some of my pip colors. I am intending to mix at least 3 shades of brown. As you can see, I'm using the same kind of wells as I did with the green because there wasn't much pigment left. So I can kind of justify using the same wells. So the base of my color for the first one is kind of like a rust color. This is way too red. This is very intense red. So I'm going to go in and add a bit of brown. There's some dark brown. There we go. That's dark brown from Etcher I'm adding in right now. Mixing that with my rusty red color that I mixed first. Okay. So I'm intending to mix some kind of an earthy brown. Okay, so this is better. It's like a nice dark rusty color. Now the second one I would like to mix for this is kind of like, let's see, if I use a bit of this ochre, which is like this nice grass color, let's say. Not really grass, I don't know, I'm lacking words. Well, never mind, you can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to mix a little of those browns as well into it. So I'm basically going for like a burnt grass color, let's say. It's like a muted yellow, I would say. Muted brown yellow, something in between those two. This will be good. And for the third one, quickly, a dark value. So I want to use quite a bit of this dark brown. Maybe a little bit of red and these like reddish tones as well. So here I'm going for like a really dark color, and this will be the shadow of my pip. So every time I mix any of those, I test them, see if they're dark enough. I feel like this could be a little bit darker, so I'm going to go in and add even more of this dark brown or even black. You know, it's fine to like use the dark colors. Okay, so now I got like a really dark color, really dark brown. So I feel like these 3 shades will make my pip quite evocative. Let's try it. Okay, so I'm gonna now have a very dirty jar. This is my dirty jar of dirty water that was getting rid of all the pigments. So I'm going to get a new jar, just so I have like, you know, a fresh water jar. So the colors are nice and transparent, let's say. I'm going to start with the lightest brown color that I mixed. So again, make sure that this is all dry. And make sure that for the first layer of the pip, you're not using too much pigment. So you kind of want a bit of water. You know, this is like a nice washed out version of this first color that I mixed. So I'm going to go in and kind of do that, just like dump it down there. But then I'm going to go back, add more water to my brush, and quickly just spread that pigment around. Basically, I want to make sure that I'm filling in the shape of the pip, the circular empty space that I have here, making sure that you'll have like an even coverage of this light brown. Using a round brush like this really helps because you can get to the edges quite well. Okay, so this is like nicely covered. I'm going to go in with more of this color, but like in a more concentrated version. So I guess at this point, I'm just loading up my brush a little bit more with this color with not as much water anymore. So it's just a little bit darker. And wherever the shadow is going to be, so basically, as I said, the light is coming from the top left-hand side, sorry. So the pip will be darker here on this side. So the first layer is always in order to build those shadow areas kind of, you know, as a base. And it's really good to keep that in mind. So basically with the first layer, you're already like thinking way ahead of yourself as to where the shadows will be and where the highlights will be. So I'm just building up a little bit of this shadow area here. Now, in order to create the highlight, I'm going to, again, clean my brush and then get rid of some of the moisture on my kitchen towel. And I'm going to do some lifting. So again, just going kind of with the dry brush, like so, lifting some of that color. So you can already see there's some highlight coming up. Move some of this pigment around as well. This stage, wherever it's wet, you can kind of move it around just so it doesn't puddle up. And now, since this is wet and I don't have that much time before it dries, I'm going to go in with a middle value. This is like my mid brown that I mixed. And again, I'm going to start with the darkest area of the pip. So it's going to be here at the bottom. And I'm adding this color here on the sides. As you can see at this point, I'm not covering the whole pip with this color anymore. Sometimes you have to be fairly careful so you don't like lose the circular shape of the pip. But yeah, I'm not covering the entire pip with this color. I would say more like kind of middle. And then I'm going in with a little bit more water on my brush again, diluting this darker color a little bit. And I'm just like transitioning, you know, going back and forth, adding more water and then slowly transitioning this darker brown with the base color. I'm going to go around on the edge as well, but again, adding more water to my brush. Going to try to gently kind of merge those edges. So I don't want any hard edges between my colors. I want to have a nice smooth transition. Now, again, quickly, you know, everything you do is fairly quick here. I know there's quite a pace, but you know, that's just what we have to deal with because it's all wet. So I have to act fairly quickly. I'm going with the dark brown and just dropping it at the bottom here. So it's like the darkest value is going to be where the shadow is. And I'm definitely not putting that dark color on the whole pip anymore. So this darkest value, I would say, is reserved for, you know, the darkest part of the pip. Now it's quite a stark contrast between the middle value and the darkest value. So again, I'm just loading up my brush with this middle value and then like slowly making this edge a little bit less intense, less stark. Okay. Now again, just loading up my brush a little bit more. Maybe you can add a little bit of this lighter value as well. And slowly try to merge those edges, just so that we don't end up with those like crazy, intense edges, you know. The more water you use, you know, kind of in control, of course, the more of a transition you'll be able to achieve. because you're essentially just diluting the color on paper. So here it's just very tricky to, kind of keep the highlight alive. And it's very much a case of going back and forth with adding more pigment, more water, and then lifting. So there's like 3 different little actions that you have to do. And you do have to do them fairly quickly, but believe me, it does get much easier the more you do it. So these movements might seem like, very crazy to you, but the more you have experience with watercolor in terms of like actually, getting a feel for it with the brush and getting to know your art supplies, the more this tempo will be, like more well-paced, and you will start finding your own rhythm. You'll start feeling when is the right moment to go in with a bit more water, when is the right moment to start blending. These things that definitely come in time. But I hope that these, quick tips are giving you like some direction in that as well. So here I'm just like blending the colors a little bit together, just so I have like a nice smooth transition. And as you can see, I'm definitely repeating some of those steps wherever I feel like I need to tweak something. I just go in and do that. Add a little bit of a darker color here again. Okay. So now that the pip is done, pretty much, again, we're in a quick live, so it's not like this will be the most perfect avocado that you will ever paint or I'll ever paint. It's definitely more just to show you like a quick, explanation of how I approach these, but I could have spent like, another 2 hours making sure that it's like really nicely blended and there's like, a great transition of colors. But I'm going to leave this to dry now, since we don't have that much time. And the one thing that I want to show you at the end, so how to add a little bit more texture to the whole of the avocado, a little bit more structure. Well, not structure per se, it's more like a little bit more character and unevenness. So I'm going to go back and very quickly mix this dark green again, dark green that I used for the edge, for the skin of the avocado. Again, is the mix of my greens and a little bit of red. Nice dark green. Perhaps I can add a little bit of this dark brown as well, just to make this dark green very dark. It's something like that, very dark green. And now just using the edge of my, sorry, not the edge, the tip of the brush, so the sharp end, I'm going to go around again, just the edge of the avocado, and add a little bit more contrast this way. So basically, watercolor dry, when they dry, they become lighter. So when things are wet on your paper, they look, things look a little bit saturated and a little bit more intense. The moment they dry, they start becoming a little bit more bleak, a bit more washed out. So if you want to preserve the contrast and the textures and like make things pop a little bit more, just so they, like catch the eye, it's worth thinking about layering. So this is just another, like basically the end layer that I'm adding to my illustration, adding a very saturated version of this dark green. So it's like a very dense paint, not much water at this point. And just using the tip of my brush, I'm just making these uneven shapes, uneven lines on the edge of my avocado in order to make the skin look darker. So, again, I'm doing it fairly quickly this time because I'm running against time. You can definitely take your time with it. You can go in with like, a detail brush, even smaller than this, and really kind of, sink into making those little bumps to make it like, botanically accurate. But even when you do it quickly, it still does what it's meant to do, which is basically just add more contrast to the edges and create more of an illusion of the actual texture of the skin. And you can add a little bit of like a mix of some kind of a brown. I'm never really that specific with my colors. I kind of just go for the earthy tones. So let's see. I'm going to add a little bit of this ochre to this dark green. And just make, maybe add a little bit of color, uneven texture to the little thing here. I don't know what it's called, by the way. This little thing. Okay, just like, you know, a tiny bit more color, just to like accentuate it a little bit more. And now, if you've done that and you have like nice skin, the only thing I like to add, this is again not essential, that's something that I enjoy doing, is adding little dots of like, I don't know, uneven texture on the whole flesh of the avocado. So here I have to kind of go back and let's see, this color that I have here on the palette already, which is like this like yellowish green, that will do quite nicely for what I want to do, but I'm going to add a little tiny bit more green to it. Basically, I want a color that's resembling the flesh. And I don't need that much of it, you know, it's just like a little bit. I added a tiny bit of this rust color to it. I just want like an organic green kind of situation like this. And again, just using the tip of my brush, so not much pressure. I'm just going to put little dots of this color here and there. So again, I'm just being quite random with this at this point, because I feel like, you know, the joy of watercolor is also just being a little bit funny with it. So maybe if I zoom in, you'll be able to see a bit better. I'm going to try to kind of make sure that it's not too dark as well. So kind of fine game, but I'm adding tiny little dots of this color here and there. And this is just my, you know, irregular dots and marks and all sorts of different wrinkles and creases, whatever you might find in any kind of fruit, you know. So maybe these are a little bit too dark. I don't mind, but if you feel like those are a little bit too dark, you can dilute this color a little bit more. And wherever that dot is still dark, you can kind of make it lighter by adding a tiny bit more water to it. But I do really enjoy adding these tiny marks, which again will dry a little bit lighter than what they look right now, because as I said, watercolors dry and they look lighter when they're not wet. But adding these textural irregularities is just like a really nice touch at the end. I feel like it's making every piece a little bit more unique because, of course, I'm not doing it in any particular order. I'm just, you know, spreading them around. And, you know, of course, you could add a little bit more green to it again. So like have a slightly different shade to this, you know, kind of like this. Come around and just add some nice little texture to the whole avocado. Quick demonstration, right? But again, just quickly to prove the point that you can do that with every part of the illustration. You can do the same with the pip. So, you know, mixing, just using the same colors that I had for the pip. Just using the tip of the brush, you can drop these little dots of color, you know, kind of being careful not to like overdo it. You can somehow help yourself with this and like, you know, mask. So sometimes maybe if your color didn't blend well enough because the edges are a bit more, you know, rough, then you can kind of help yourself with these little textures. And then that will kind of also divert the, you know, the attention from those edges. That's how I like to think about it. You know, like you can do little tricks like that with watercolor, and then you can really improve an illustration fairly easily.
We're coming up on the Q&A time, but don't worry, you can still work during the Q&A.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm actually almost done, weirdly enough. Like I'm quite happy with the pace. I mean, you know, again, just to anyone wondering, this is the kind of illustration that would probably take at least 2 hours to do. And, you know, like I did it fairly quickly, and I know that the pace might have been fairly fast, but there is just a lot of little, you know, things that you have to consider, pace of like, you know, mixing the colors correctly and stuff. So of course, you know, it takes time to kind of get used to those techniques, but as I said, you know, I'm also rushing here as well. So, you know, normally if it was just my own time, I would take it a little bit, you know, more gently, and I would take like 2 hours probably to finish something like this in a way that I would feel satisfied with. So, you know, don't stress. But we can certainly take some questions if there are any queries and all that. Any problems? Happy to help.
Yeah, we got a couple questions earlier. So I noticed you also enjoy handmade paper. What qualities do you look for when choosing a handmade paper?
Oh, that's a very good question. I'm actually not, I wouldn't say I'm super experienced in handmade papers. I've certainly tried a few. It's not something that I'm like crazy for. I mean, I wouldn't like go out of my way to like only paint on handmade paper, but the ones that I've used, I really enjoyed their texture. It was quite rough, definitely quite bumpy. Handmade paper tends to be like, a little bit rough, uneven, the texture is like kind of unpredictable almost, which means that for botanical illustration, it's like really nice and forgiving. Like it's a little bit difficult to paint on it, but the textures that you can evoke with it and, the kind of little irregular things that I enjoy are very nice to evoke on those papers. So I'd say definitely try them if you can get your hands on some handmade papers, because it's very different to like, like manufactured papers.
Do you have any suggestions to avoid overworking or the blending and or fixing overworking? Sometimes I feel like my blending becomes a bit of a mess.
Yes, that's very easy to like, it's very easy to make a mess. I totally understand that. And I still, mess my paintings up a lot. I don't know. I think genuinely it's just doing it more and more and more. And I know it sounds a little bit, like dire, but that's honestly the only advice that I can really come up with ever. Just focus on, like, if you, for example, focus on one subject like the avocado, or maybe a specific flower or something that you really enjoy. I mean, you have to really like the subject to want to go back to it. But, just commit to maybe one or two subjects and try them and again and on different surfaces as well, maybe, like different papers with varying degrees of water. In sketchbooks, on pads of paper, all these things will influence the way you work. But the thing is, like, if you choose one subject and you really focus on it, you will first of all start seeing the progression much better. You will see yourself improving over time, but then, your technique will be adjusted to that one subject, and then it will be easier for you to trace back what you've done wrong, why, maybe some colors don't blend as well, or, kind of what you should do next time if you want to blend your colors a bit better. It's really just comes down to that, doing it over and over again. So yeah, I mean, I know this is not the best answer, but, having to kind of develop the feeling for how much water you use is something like so personal. Like you really have this connection between your hand and your eye that you develop over time. So it's really, I feel like, the only real route that you can take, just pick a favorite subject and then kind of see where it takes you. That's my best advice for this, I think.
For botanical painting, would you suggest painting on cold pressed or hot pressed paper more?
Oh, you know what? It depends. Some people really enjoy hot pressed paper for that. I've never really liked it that much, but I think it's very personal. It's something that you really have to, again, just try for yourself. I know a lot of people who use hot press paper, which is smooth paper, for botanical illustration, because they find that it's just like easier for them to control the flow of water. For me, it's been the opposite. I actually really like the texture. I feel like cold press paper's got like the nice tooth that makes the pigment kind of sit inside of those little holes. So for me, it's always been more evocative because of the textures that I can evoke. So I'm all into like those irregular shapes. But having said that, I think if you work on smaller paper, like if it's small illustration, I think hot press is really nice, because if you make tiny illustrations on cold press paper, it's a little bit more difficult to work your brush around it, because it's, the holes are fairly big compared to a small mini illustration you might be working on. So yeah, I mean, again, it's like very personal. I think you have to try both in order to make a decision for yourself. But I certainly prefer cold press for the irregular texture and the way the pigment, it just like sinks into the paper. So I think, but I certainly know a lot of people who use hot press paper. So, it's just personal preference, I think.
Another question here. Oh,
So sorry, just like quickly, your paintings will definitely look a bit different, you know. So like you can compare the results. Maybe again, if you use the same subject, you can do it on cold press and hot press and see the difference, because maybe you will like one more than the other, you know. You never know.
so another question for you here. Noticed you did not change your brush. Do you generally paint with only one brush?
Yeah, to be honest, quite often, because the round synthetic brushes, I have this small brush here on the side, but I actually haven't used it today. I didn't have time, but synthetic round brushes are very versatile. And actually this is, you know, like a medium-sized brush, I'd say. Well, this is size 12, so it's like medium-sized. But I can make quite a large wash with it if I put pressure on the brush, but I can also make really tiny details if I only use the tip of the brush. So it's very versatile. And sometimes I just use one brush like here. But yeah, if I'm, you know, if I did this like, you know, very properly, like really took my time with this illustration, I'd probably switch to a smaller one. And then I could be like really precise with my edges and my, you know, my little details. So yeah, I would say it depends, you know. I think for quicker paintings, I probably just use one. But if I'm like being a bit more intricate with it, then yeah, I would switch them around and use a smaller one too.
So it's coming to 1 o'clock now. If there's no more questions, I'm going to wrap this up.
Yeah, it's good timing. I'm pleased with the timing, actually.
It looks so beautiful. I'm reading a lot of the comments and everybody's saying how great it looks, how you could look like you just take a bite out of it.
Oh, you guys, that's very sweet. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's very pleasurable for me too. It's my favorite subject, as I said. So what I was saying, you know, with like repeating and this practice on your favorite subject is very much true. And I say that because, you know, it's been the case for me. Like avocados are definitely like my favorite thing to look at. So for me, it never gets boring. You have to choose a subject that doesn't get boring to you. And then you will really enjoy, you know, even the mistakes, you know, because you won't get discouraged. So yeah, that's the takeaway, really.
I apologize if you can hear construction above me. I live in an apartment. Sorry about that.
So good.
So on April 4th, you'll be doing a mini workshop with us. Do you want to just mention quickly what you'll be doing?
Yes, so I'll show you very quickly the kind of ideas we'll be developing in the mini workshop. So we'll be building up on the botanical illustration as well. So today we did a little avocado, but again, it's just a cross section, so it's kind of laying flat on the page in terms of perspective. But then the mini workshop we'll be looking into perspective drawing and painting kind of realistic watercolors with more perspective. So we'll be looking at angles, a little bit more shadow areas, how to build those shadows in order to evoke those, you know, those kind of palpable textures and the things that kind of, you know, stick out. You can really imitate those, you know, those kind of light and contrast illusions with the right technique. So yeah, we'll just be building up on those ideas basically. So, you know, everything that I discussed here with kind of blending the colors and adding darker values to the lighter colors. We'll be building on that, but then also looking at perspective and kind of thinking about the shadow in a little bit more depth. So yeah, that will be the mini workshop. Here I had like some examples of different studies. So again, just like a bit more perspective, you know, and the different ways you can approach that.
Beautiful. I just dropped a link for it in the chat if you guys are curious and want to sign up. All the information is there in the link.
That will be on the 4th of April, right? Yeah, it is 4th.
Yeah, April 4th. Also, I dropped a link a couple times for just a quick little survey, just to let us know how we did today, if we need to improve on anything, or if we just did great and you want to let us know that. If you guys wouldn't mind filling it out, it takes less than 2 minutes. It's multiple choice. It really helps us.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be great to get some feedback, actually. If you could.
Also, tag us with hashtag at your mini workshop, anything that you've created today, or if you're just watching, just take a picture of you watching during the mini workshop and tag us on social media, Facebook or Instagram with hashtag at your mini workshop. We do a monthly draw for $50 to spend in our store, and who knows, you might win. Also, if you do that, Yola can see what you painted along with us today.
Yeah, that would be great for me, actually. I love interacting with people on Instagram. Like Instagram is my main thing. So, you know, if you guys want to show me what you came up with, that would be amazing. And I'm happy to share that too, if you're comfortable with it. So it'd be lovely to see your work. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, everybody. With that being said, my name is Brittany, and I was your studio host today from Etcher Lab. Thank you again, Yola. It was amazing. And of course, your work turned out beautiful. It looks like I could take a bite out of it, like somebody said earlier.
Thank you so much for having me. Yes, this was really fun. So I'm really looking forward to the mini workshop now, just to develop on this as well. Thank you so much for everyone who joined.
Looking forward to the mini workshop as well. Can't wait to see you all there. I don't see Yola as an option on the feedback link.
I'm not sure what that means.
Sorry, that's just a question for me. The little feedback demo link I gave everybody, if she's not on an option there, it could just be that it needs to be updated on our end. I will let the admins know and maybe just try again in a little bit, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you so much, everybody. I am going to be ending this stream now. Hope you all have a great day and stay safe.
Thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, please feel free to share your work with me. I would love to see it. Thank you.
Okay, the stream's